I'm Emily Chang, and welcome to Bloomberg's Front Row. Today I'm talking to Brad Stone. He is the senior executive editor of global technology coverage at Bloomberg News and author of Amazon Unbound, Jeff Bezos and the Invention of a Global Empire. The book chronicles the rise of the e-commerce behemoth and details how it became one of the most powerful and feared players in the global economy.
Amazon right now is a boulder rolling downhill. It is picking up speed. And the idea of anything interrupting that in any kind of significant way that sets back the company, I have a hard time imagining.
We talked about Amazon's exponential growth over the last 10 years, Bezos' biggest moonshots from Alexa to Blue Origin, and we scrutinized Amazon's power as it faces rising competition from everyone from lawmakers to its own workers. Here's my conversation with Brad Stone. This is your second book about Amazon. Your first book, The Everything Store, became an international bestseller, critically acclaimed, won awards. Why did you want to write another book about Amazon and Jeff Bezos?
Simply because it was a good story. The Everything Store covers the first 15 years of Amazon history. It is the idea coming to fruition, Amazon rising to prominence during the dot-com boom, almost dying during the dot-com bust, and then reviving. And incredibly, the creation of value and new businesses and new products has been even more dramatic since then. So 2010, this is a company with a valuation of less than $80 billion, the Kindle company, an online retailer, and today Amazon is a $1.6 trillion company. Amazing.
Exactly. So 10 years ago, Amazon was a $34 billion company. Jeff Bezos was worth about $16 billion.
The guy was impoverished back then.
And I guess I wonder, did you ever think that Amazon and Jeff Bezos himself would get this big?
Definitely not. I mean, the pace of the increase has been startling. Even when I started the book in 2017, Jeff Bezos was maybe the third wealthiest person in the world, and the company was not a $1 trillion company. And so there's something that's really happened in the past few years that I'm writing about in the book, which is about the deepening, the acceleration of Amazon's flywheel, the expansion of its transportation network closer to people's homes, the globalization of the marketplace, and then the success of product categories like Alexa, the Amazon supermarkets, but at the same time, the real cost of this expansion. The world starting to reckon with Amazon's power, and then of course the other piece of the book, Bezos' very public and visible transformation on the world stage into this political figure, source of controversy, source of scandal, and now a retiring CEO.
Well, let's talk about that, because Jeff Bezos has just announced the date that Andy Jassy will take over as CEO, July 5th. This was another shocking development that happened towards the end of your writing process. Why is he stepping back?
Yes and no on it being shocking. The story that I'm telling in the book is a story of a CEO who's taking on so much additional responsibility outside Amazon, whose interests are varying outside Amazon, who has a partner now in Lauren Sanchez, who's bringing him into elite society. They bought this super yacht that I wrote about in the book. He owns the Washington Post. He has a philanthropy. He's got to give away a fortune of now close to $200 billion. I just think that, one, his interests varied well beyond Amazon. And also, he perhaps realized that he's not the right figurehead anymore for Amazon. As this mountain of public attention and scrutiny comes to Amazon, to have the wealthiest person in the world sitting there in the witness chair in front of Congress. Andy Jassy, is a dedicated and successful leader in his own right, but he's also a more humbler target as the leader, the figurehead of Amazon.
Well, and we know that Jeff Bezos trained Andy Jassy. He knows how Bezos leads this company better than anybody else. But inevitably, the company will change under Andy Jassy, don't you think? How will Amazon change?
Well, I would just point out to what's been happening over the past few years at Amazon. And again, this is in the book, with Bezos nurturing the newer projects and coming back for the pandemic a little bit, but really allowing Jassy to run AWS and Jeff Wilke and now Dave Clark to run the retail business. And coming back once or twice a year to audit problems and to look at the operating plan, but allowing, this to run on its own. And in fact, how when you see Bezos in Hollywood or in DC or giving speeches or running HQ2 or appearing on Barry Diller's yacht, I mean, that has been because he's allowed Amazon. So I think it's been a gradual process, and some of the changes have already been felt. And also, we should say that he's going to be executive chairman and run it, still nurturing new projects. He says he wants to lead the way in reevaluating Amazon's relationship with its employees. And so it's also a little unclear how fully Bezos will step away. So yes, some changes, but I believe they've been happening and will continue to happen gradually.
There's a question of, can Amazon and Jassy, even if Jeff Bezos is in the chairman role, hang on to the top talent that Jeff Bezos has cultivated over all of these years? Amazon's top ranks are filled with these loyalists who have been there for decades.
I would have agreed, and I probably do agree, that that is one of the biggest challenges. But the idea that Jeff Blackburn, this longtime Amazon loyalist who actually helped Amazon go public as an investment banker, joined the ranks, left, went on sabbatical 2 years ago, and then just came back to run the entertainment division, it's interesting. It may be that the scope of the challenges now for Amazon might help it retain some of that key talent. Look, but it is an important question because the compensation at Amazon is very weighted towards stock. That is a stock price that has steadily increased. A lot of those executives can go and find better opportunities in terms of compensation elsewhere. And so if we do see a protracted period of stagnation in Amazon's stock price, you might be right in that Jassy will kind of have his hands full populating the top ranks.
Now, just since you published the book, Blue Origin, his space venture, has announced taking the first human to space in July. Amazon has announced it's buying MGM Studios in a $9 billion deal, and the company was hit with its first major antitrust suit, all in the last few weeks. Would anything surprise you at this point?
None of those really surprised me, but hopefully I can take them each one by one. You know, Blue Origin announced an auction for tickets on a New Shepard space flight. They have been testing this thing for years and years, and they say they'll bring test astronauts up in July. They have missed a lot of their benchmarks. I have a very critical chapter about Blue Origin in the book. I think that is still, success there is still up in the air. MGM, I tell the story of Amazon's migration into Hollywood, bringing content to replace two-day shipping as the core benefit of the Prime ecosystem. You know, Amazon is now fighting with Disney and Apple, huge franchises. So MGM for $8.5 billion gives them a vault of James Bond and Rocky and RoboCop and Legally Blonde, these properties that can be redeveloped as franchises.
The book also chronicles so many of Amazon's moonshots, from Amazon Alexa to buying Whole Foods, and Jeff Bezos' moonshots, buying the Washington Post, conquering India, developing Amazon Studios from scratch. How many of these ideas were Jeff Bezos himself, started by this, a provocative, I want to do this, versus the Amazon team or people around him who had this idea?
They like to say that it's a decentralized culture with ideas springing from the bottom. As I think, peeled back the layers in this book and in my first Amazon book, it is remarkable how often that there at the center, at the origin, is Bezos with an email to his executives. We should build a $20 computer whose brains are in the cloud, controllable by voice. That was the original email behind Alexa. Groceries, there was a senior executive who was pushing that. But certainly it's Bezos seeing the opportunity, authorizing the investment, and picking the time where a greenfield opportunity turns into a land rush. So it'll be interesting if they can replace that kind of innovation and drive without Bezos really there day to day.
You found, actually, the voice of Alexa, which was quite a coup. Who is Alexa, and where does she, I believe, live?
Right. I don't remember if I mentioned this to you, that I was interested in finding this voice when I set out on this book, but we knew who the voice of Siri was. So I suspected that there was a voice actress. And in fact, her name is Nina Raleigh, and she's a voice actress in Boulder, Colorado. And this was a deep, dark, buried secret for her and for Amazon. And look, I think it's interesting that these voices are now some of the most ubiquitous, maybe in the history, right, of humanity. And the hundreds of millions of homes where Alexa resides, the Super Bowl commercials where Amazon advertises the Echo every year. And so it was interesting to me to find out, okay, well, who is laboring under an NDA to record what Alexa says every single day?
Now, Amazon Alexa was something that seemed to come out of Jeff's mind, and there were plenty of people who thought it was crazy, including the person that he put on the project. I think it's sort of a great encapsulation of how an idea at Amazon goes from a seed to, wow, this massive product that came out of nowhere. Walk us through that process and how Alexa came to be.
So I talked about that email he sent to executives and just sort of conceiving it, looking for a way to exploit the advantage in cloud computing, sensing that maybe the technology for voice recognition was close. The biggest challenge was something called far-field voice recognition, so not talking into your phone, talking to Siri, but talking across a room, talking to Alexa. And that's a really hard technical problem because of echoes and all sorts of other factors. So essentially, it was Bezos meeting with the team multiple times a week, spending all amounts of money to hire the best people he could, acquiring a couple of companies, and then in the end, taking Alexa out into the field in total secrecy and hiring contractors to come through these rooms and recite scripts and make open-ended commands, because ultimately these products are only as good as the data that they have at their disposal to continue to get better. And so it's a great example of how the founder, in this case, can kind of push through the bureaucratic barriers at a company and then basically encourage the executives to be unbound in their ambitions and investment to get to a point where this thing was good enough to launch at the end of 2014.
Now, we talked about MGM, which I believe would be Amazon's second biggest acquisition ever. Whole Foods is the biggest, $13.7 billion. And that's actually an idea that, as you write, Jeff Bezos had to be convinced on. What happened there? Has that turned out to be a good acquisition? Because I don't think grocery shopping has been revolutionized quite yet.
Right, not yet. It's interesting. Amazon was really going slow with grocery delivery. They had Amazon Fresh in Seattle in 2007. Bezos thought that opportunity would be there, and he was investing in not just Alexa, but smartphones in China and ultimately India. And it was only until Instacart really hit the scene and started to raise money from Sequoia Capital and others, and Google launched Google Express, that I think he recognized that this was becoming more of a land rush. And even then, Amazon kind of stumbled a little bit with Prime Now and Amazon Fresh. In 2017, John Mackey is in trouble with Whole Foods Market, and Amazon makes the acquisition. But I think you raise a good point, which is Amazon's done very little with Whole Foods. It's probably learned from it, but it hasn't turbocharged its growth. The selection on Whole Foods shelves hasn't really changed. They've moved Prime into Whole Foods Market a little bit. But interestingly, the major vector of expansion for Amazon in supermarkets are these Amazon Go stores and Amazon Fresh supermarkets that they're stamping out all over the country. So yes, Amazon's future is in grocery supermarkets and grocery delivery, but it might not actually be a Whole Foods-centric future.
So let's talk then about some of the other moonshots, and that, one which it doesn't seem like such a moonshot now, but it was AWS.
Right.
And that is the unit that grew up under Andy Jassy, which has become such a massive moneymaker for Amazon. Could you see AWS becoming bigger than the e-commerce business, and how much bigger, and when?
I mean, I think if you chart out the numbers and the rate of growth, AWS is currently a $50 billion a year run rate. It's an extraordinary amount for a 15-year-old business. You'd have to chart it out and see where the lines intersect. But certainly, with AWS growing by leaps and bounds and cloud computing growing so quickly, governments embracing it, universities and companies, Amazon's on track to be not just a dominant retailer, but a dominant enterprise software company. That's extraordinary, and you do wonder if that will be a source of increased antitrust attention as regulators try to figure out, okay, what are the connections between these two giants? And does the fact that retail has AWS and the wholesale rates for its cloud computing needs at its disposal, and the cloud computing division has Amazon Retail as a first and largest customer to get to scale on some of its new services, does that indicate a kind of anti-competitive arrangement? And it's something that the company is going to have to defend in the years ahead.
Now, during your reporting process, something big happened, and it emerged that Jeff Bezos had been having an affair. And it was splashed all over the National Enquirer. I'll never forget you and I trying to find a hard copy of the National Enquirer, which is actually hard to do in San Francisco.
I believe we failed.
we didn't ever find it. In fact, somebody emailed it to us.
Right.
But you write that Jeff Bezos is so meticulously scripted in public, plans his appearances, and in this case, it seemed that he had failed to protect his image. What happened there?
Well, I mean, in some ways, it's a very human story, right? He was somewhat curiously conducting a relationship out in the open, maybe didn't anticipate that there would be tabloid attention. There was. And then there was, of course, this incredible series of events where he wrote a Medium post accusing the National Enquirer of extorting him, basically trying to manipulate him into dropping charges that the Enquirer story was politically motivated. He published that. He insinuated that the whole thing was related to his ownership of the Washington Post, or perhaps the Saudi government's enmity towards him and the Washington Post for the coverage of the Jamal Khashoggi murder. And in the end, it really wasn't. It had much more to do with the brother of Lauren Sanchez, who provided the materials to the National Enquirer. But look, it was this incredible demonstration of Bezos' some unique ability to maybe manipulate the levers of media, at least back then. And what people remember of that is maybe Bezos' stewardship of the Post and his bravery in that situation. And look, he came out, I think the cover of Business Week was Bezos wins again for my excerpt of the book. And that's because despite this potential embarrassment, he kind of somehow managed to come out on top again.
Exactly. He manages to cast himself as the victim in this whole affair. And I wonder how much that was aided by the attacks of President Trump, who, because he had bought the Washington Post, took to calling him Jeff Bozo. And Jeff Bezos took the bait and actually fired back a few times at the president, which was a very different strategy than most other business and certainly big tech leaders who tried to be more diplomatic. What did you make of that?
That's right. So I have this scene in the book of Jay Carney, a former member of the Obama administration, kind of pleading with Bezos to not respond to Donald Trump. And I think this is part of the process here, the transformation or metamorphosis that I'm describing in the book of Bezos as a secretive, Amazon-focused technologist to a figure who emerges somewhat bulked up, by the way, on the world stage. And he wants to mix it up with Trump. I think he feels a pride and a defensiveness around the Washington Post and an eagerness to engage. And maybe at the time he thought he was kind of doing something patriotic by contending with this presidential candidate. So, it was pride. It was also maybe a little bit of vanity, of feeling like, he was now taking his turn as the target of this impetuous candidate.
How does the Washington Post, which he and Amazon have claimed is completely separate, completely independent from Amazon, how does that play into the Jeff Bezos empire?
It is independent from Amazon, although there are connections. Mm-hmm. If you're a Prime member, I think you get digital access to the Washington Post. If you're a Kindle Fire tablet owner, you get access and a subscription to an app for the Washington Post. So there are some connections. I think it's helped with the revival of the Washington Post. But what's helped more explicitly is Bezos' time, his attention and focus on building new things at the Post. He didn't open his pocketbook. He made them bring them real budgets, but he allowed them to safely pivot, transition from an analog regional business model to a global and very national digital model.
Now, speaking of some of Bezos' other outside projects, we touched on Blue Origin earlier, but you actually go into detail about the relationship between Bezos and Elon Musk, who, of course, runs SpaceX. They run the companies very differently. Hard to believe that Blue Origin is actually more than 20 years old, and now they're just getting to their first human launch. But how is Blue Origin different from SpaceX, and how is Elon Musk different from Jeff Bezos?
It's incredible. In the empire of accomplishment, Blue Origin for Jeff Bezos is kind of, the tarnished jewel, at least right now.
The ugly stepchild?
or let me use the metaphor they use. It's the tortoise and not the hare.
Okay.
He always wanted to go slow. He wanted to constrain the investment. He wanted to keep the team small, and he wanted to move step by step. And so suborbital, or the edge of space, and bringing tourists there was going to be the first step. And then they would get to orbit, and then they would go to the moon. And what happened was the hare came along. Elon comes along, finances it with venture capital, and then government contracts, and gets all the glory, and they do quite well. And I think Bezos, has a fair amount of, I don't know if jealousy is the right word, but curiosity that here Elon is getting paid by the government to launch, and he is still funding Blue Origin to the tune of $1 billion in Amazon stock every year. And so we've seen Bezos accelerate Blue Origin's timetable, its ambitions, its timeline, and seed a little bit of dysfunction over the past few years. And so far, there hasn't been a lot to show for it.
Now, we, of course, debate Amazon's power, whether Amazon is good or bad for the world. And, some folks have said Amazon kept this country, this world running through the pandemic, and yet not without controversy. As you look at the pandemic and how Amazon delivered and did not, what do you think Amazon got right, and what do you think Amazon got wrong in that critical moment?
I think there was a lot they got right. They kept the fulfillment centers running. They instituted very quickly precautionary measures in the fulfillment centers. They bet big on COVID-19 testing. And look, they were a lifeline to many families around the world, including mine, in their ability to deliver at a time when there was a lot of anxiety about going to the store. Now, look, there was a lot of criticism, and some of it, I think, quite right, that in the early months, when there was a lot of ambiguity around the safe things to do, and COVID-19 was spreading, they brought workers into those fulfillment centers at a time when probably some were exposed. The other thing that I think that they probably really, got wrong, and is a sign of some of the cruelty in the Amazon culture, is when there were whistleblowers or employees who were speaking out about safety, or the climate justice activists inside Amazon who wanted to talk about employee safety, they fired them, They just do not brook any internal dissent. Perhaps they're worried that a small spark spreads and leads to unionization, their absolute allergy at the company. And they fired people who were kind of speaking their piece and their situation. And I think for a lot of people, outsiders as well as Amazon employees, it just didn't feel right.
We had Chris Smalls, actually, an Amazon employee who was speaking out, who had just gotten fired, call into Bloomberg Technology minutes after that had happened. And I remember that moment. And so I wonder, because Amazon tells the story that the vast majority of its workers are paid well, get good benefits, are happy. Then you have Senator Bernie Sanders, beating the drum, saying that is not true. What is the truth?
The truth is complicated, and there's probably not a singular truth. I mean, this is a company now that employs 1.2 million people. You find pockets of discontent and happiness everywhere you go. And in Bessemer, Alabama, unless that verdict is overturned, employees there voted against a unionization attempt. So, look, the life of a worker in any warehouse, and particularly in a fulfillment center, is not easy. They are measured by algorithms. They are sometimes fired by algorithms. The company does a lot of things to ensure that if people are stagnating, they leave, They're put on performance improvement plans, or there are no raises after 3 years. And so in some ways, it's not a very empathetic arrangement. But it's, as I said, it's complicated, and there are parts of the world where the economic reality is so dire that actually a $15 an hour wage in an Amazon fulfillment center is a comparatively good occupation. And so, look, I think there are plenty of ways in which Amazon can improve, and Bezos has finally acknowledged that and says he wants to devote more time to it. And at the same time, probably lots to gain from employees banding together and maybe successfully bargaining collectively.
Well, and it's not just lawmakers, it's not just employees, it's the sellers themselves, which is part of what this new antitrust suit is based on. There's a huge conflict between how, obviously Amazon enables all of these small businesses to reach the world, and yet sellers complain that, they're forced to offer the lowest prices on Amazon, even lower than their own websites.
Right.
What are the problems that you see? Because you went back and you talked to some sellers who 5 years ago were singing Amazon's praises.
Right. Yeah, let me explain that. So in lieu of an overarching poll that measured the sentiment of Amazon sellers, which it was really hard to do, I thought I will go to all the sellers who Bezos mentioned in his investor letters over the years. And almost to a one, they were really disgruntled by how things had turned out and had moved largely off of Amazon. And I think what that shows is the Amazon frontier, the e-commerce playing field, but in particular Amazon, is almost in turmoil. It's changing all the time. The playing field is increasingly tilted in favor of overseas sellers with lower cost bases, Chinese sellers close to their manufacturers, and it's really hard to compete. And that's a reality, and a bitter one, I think, for a lot of sellers, and one that Amazon, I think, has gone to great lengths to obfuscate in their messaging and in some of their internal marketing to sellers. But look, you sort of asked about what are the anti-competitive elements there, and I think there are a number of things they do, like the price parity provision that the DC AG is calling out, where Amazon is insisting that sellers sell at a lower price or an equal price on Amazon as elsewhere, that the company's gotten so big that really deserve more attention. Amazon's going to defend it, but look, they could also walk away from it, and it probably doesn't hurt their business all that much.
Well, and you talked about AWS. Do you see other parts of Amazon's business, Amazon's power, that should be scrutinized?
the most challenging thing, and hopefully the thing that the book helps with, is how complex a company this is, how opaque the connections are between the various divisions. I think that some of the things that will get the most attention are the easiest to understand. So we talked about price parity, but also Amazon's stewardship of its private label business. The fact that when you search for batteries, Amazon Basics shows up, instead of the competing brands. Or when you search for nutritional supplements, the ones that Amazon is doing now happen to be the ones that the third-party sellers had the most success with. And this question of whether Amazon is peaking at the vault of data that it has from its platform, utility for other sellers. And so look, I think that'll be looked at. I think Amazon probably already senses that it's vulnerable and it's probably started to change. But clearly there was behavior in the past that needs to be evaluated in terms of how Amazon has grown some of these new businesses and become such an unstoppable juggernaut.
Do you think Amazon should or will be broken up?
I think the path to a legal breakup, as we saw with Microsoft in the 90s, is years long and probably ineffectual in the end. Because as I said, it's not a traditional monopoly. So I have a dim view of that. As to whether they voluntarily do it at some point, I feel like Bezos was never really into that kind of financial engineering, and the company gets a lot of value by being together. But down the line, as he becomes maybe less of a force there, if outside investors clamor for it, it probably would unlock some value. So I do expect we'll hear more about it.
You describe in detail how Bezos frames his failures, news stories about Amazon that are not good. He puts them up on the wall. And there's this anecdote you share about how he's talking to employees and he says, every company goes bankrupt someday and so will Amazon. Normally they go bankrupt after 30 years. Well, we're coming on to 30 years of Amazon. Do you see that in the near future? Do you see that in a century?
No. Well, not in the near future. Look, the key to Bezos' success has always been this potent mixture of inspiration and intimidation. And this is in the second category. He is lighting a fire under his employees. He is saying the danger lurks around every corner, that they need to be constantly inventing and reevaluating the relationship with customers, and pointing to this mythical possibility of someone in the garage inventing something new. Now, there have been small upstarts, like Shopify is a great example of this Canadian juggernaut. And I think Amazon does so much that there are kind of opportunities there for disruption. Shopify kind of allowing brands to go directly to their customers. But Amazon right now is a boulder rolling downhill. It is picking up speed. And the idea of anything interrupting that in any kind of significant way that sets back the company, I have a hard time imagining.
So if you could, and I'm not saying you will, write a third book about Amazon, what would be in that book?
Well, first of all, it's a terrible question to ask now that I'm barely recovered. But the reason I wrote this book was because it was an incredible story. I believe it's one of the best business stories of our age. Amazon, getting to $1.5 trillion in market cap, really in the span of 25 years. If in 10 years there was another chapter that we can't possibly imagine, and perhaps it has something to do with Bezos and his philanthropy and really deploying that $200 billion fortune to make a significant change in the pace of climate disruption, then there'd be something interesting there to write about, another installment. But we'll have to see about that.
Brad Stone, thank you so much for joining us. So great to have you, and congratulations on the book, Amazon Unbound, available now.